Welcome to my presentation on how to juggle and complete, probably the most important word in this title, multiple creative projects. And this really is implied, but I mean at the same time, or more or less at the same time, within the same, let's say 6 months to a year, depending on how complicated these projects are. My name is Christine Stoddard, and I'm from Quail Press and Productions and based in New York City. So who am I? I'm not going to waste too much time introducing myself because my bio is all over the place, and you probably signed up for this presentation because you saw my bio or you saw samples of my work online, or if you're in New York or Washington, DC, where I do a lot of other work, maybe you saw something in person or in print. That also bears saying. So I have experience doing a wide range of creative projects. My original background is in writing and visual art, both of which I started doing as a young child. And as a teenager, I began working professionally, doing original projects, commissions, and work for hire in publishing, visual art, and more so in my early 20s and in my teens, theater, film, TV, journalism, and creative advertising. So I've published books in poetry, fiction, history, children's literature, and photography, that is photo books. I've won awards, grants, and residencies. I'm a member of a few different professional guilds and one union. And I've done work for, sometimes it feels like everybody, the Art Deco Society of New York, PBS, different women's publications, general interest publications, book publishers, television companies, etc. So I'm mentioning all of this so that you understand that I'm coming at this presentation from a multimedia perspective, having published, exhibited, produced, and booked different kinds of creative work. I do encourage you, if you haven't already, to check out my original projects at worldofchristinestoddard.com. These are samples of projects that I have directed or originated in some way. I'm the author or the director. I use the term artist pretty loosely. I have a very expansive idea of what an artist is. To some people, an artist is just a painter. To me, I think more of a conceptual artist, an artist who's in charge of a concept in a creative work and leading it from start to finish. And you can see examples of my client work at wordsmith.com, wordsmithchristine.com. You'll see examples of projects that I've done specifically because a client wanted it done. These are projects that I have done not necessarily out of passion, but because I needed to make money, had to pay the bills. Some of the projects, of course, I was very excited about and very happy to complete. At this point, I'm trying to focus as much on original projects as possible. And that's the sort of work that I'm referring to largely in this presentation. Projects that you, as an artist of some kind, whether you're a creative writer or a director or a painter, photographer, or you do a mix of these things or something else, these are projects that you want to start and you want to see finished. So before you tackle any creative projects, you have to dream it. And this is the fun part. This is, for most people, I should say, this is the most exciting part. This is the part where we don't have to be realistic as artists. We just get to daydream. We get to imagine what it is we want to accomplish and put out there for the world to consume, or whatever our audience might be. Maybe it's not the whole world, maybe it's a much smaller audience. This is the part where you brainstorm. For people who aren't naturally creative, and I do believe creativity is a skill you can develop, brainstorming can be daunting. Maybe ideas don't come to you right away, and that's fine. But definitely give yourself the chance to just indulge in your dreams. Think about what your heart wants, what it is you want to paint. Do you have some grand idea for a 12-part mural series? Or do you have a grand idea for a feature film or a novel trilogy? It doesn't matter what it is. This is the stage in the process where you just get to really grow your eyes as big as you can, grow your heart as big as you can, and daydream. This is not the stage that holds back. This is the stage to be bold, at least in your mind. And this is unfortunately the part of the process that also receives a lot of criticism from people who are not artists or people who are dismissive of artists. And unfortunately, there is some of that negativity in our society where artists are not always rewarded or recognized for their skill set. We see this quite often. I'll get into that a little bit later. But you shouldn't hold back. You should give yourself permission to dream. Don't worry about what other people think, because you deserve a chance at whatever it is you want. Emphasis on a chance. It doesn't mean that you are entitled to anything. Hard work matters. Luck is a reality. You have to work for what you want, and circumstances do have to be right for what you want. But you do deserve a chance to at least try. So you need to let go of negative self-talk, especially if you're going to do something big and ambitious. You can't just constantly get down on yourself. Otherwise, you are not going to accomplish what it is you want to accomplish. You are enough. And in our society, we do, and other cultures as well, it's not just the United States, but certainly in a consumerist culture, we are encouraged to think that we aren't enough and that we have to buy things to make ourselves better. And that way we can be enough. Well, you as a human being, really, you have everything you need inside of you to get started on a creative project. It's up to you through time and effort, lots of hard work to develop your skill set and to develop your work ethic and to persevere and go after your goals. But you are enough to certainly get started. So some people, even younger people, might let past failures or missed opportunities as an artist discourage them. And they say, you know what, I don't want to write anymore. I don't want to act anymore. I don't want to paint anymore because of whatever happened. Maybe you didn't get the part in the school play. Maybe you didn't gain admission into art school. Maybe you didn't win this competition that you thought you would win. Whatever it is, don't let the past dictate what your future can be. There's that expression that life is too short, and it's true, but life is also long and you have other opportunities. Maybe you are stuck in this way of thinking that because you missed a certain opportunity or a project failed, quote unquote, that you can't try something again. That's not true. Almost anything you can try again in some way, in some capacity. It might not be exactly the way you dreamt it would be, but maybe that's just because you were short-sighted or your thinking wasn't expansive enough, and that there are alternatives you hadn't even thought of because you didn't know that they existed. There are lots of ways to be an artist, is probably the shortest version of what I'm trying to say. So let yourself go for it. At the same time, you do have to be realistic. It's that tension, that contradiction that makes being an artist so difficult. You can and you should dream big, but you should also be practical. Now, I'm not saying you need to be so practical that you go to law school or become a doctor or become an accountant and give up on all your creative dreams and never pursue your creative dreams, even as a side thing, even as a hobby, because someone told you that was silly and not worth your time. That's not what I'm saying. You should still dream. But what I am saying is that you absolutely cannot do everything, especially not by yourself. You can be multifaceted and you can be interdisciplinary and you can be ambitious, but you don't want to burn out or exhaust yourself either. You need to think about working smarter, not harder. Another expression that's very relevant to artists, or should be. You only have so much time in a day, in a week, in a month, in a year, in life. Another important point to consider for any kind of artist is to choose your collaborators wisely. These could be other artists that you work with. These could be different business partners or business entities that you collaborate with. Whomever you're going to associate yourself with as an artist needs to be somebody that you trust. It doesn't mean that you trust them with everything, with your whole life, but you do need to trust them in some capacity as makes sense for whatever kind of project you're pursuing. And on a related note, with collaboration, you do have to learn how to delegate. Just about any famous artist you can think of throughout history, at least the ones who gained recognition during their lifetime, have had different kinds of partners, assistants, interns, people who help them make whatever it is they're making, manage their life, manage their business, so that all of the moving parts are looked after. And of course, money, 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 money. So many things cost money. It costs money to publish a book, to buy a Facebook ad, to buy a canvas, to print photographs, to get headshots done as an actor. So where are you going to get the money for whatever creative project or projects you have in mind? Some people say, oh, I'll just use my own money. Okay, are you going to use your own money for everything? Are there different partners? Are there different clients who can fund some of what you're doing? Maybe all of what you're doing? Are there grants that you can apply for? Is there a Kickstarter that you can do? You do have to think about money. And on a related note, what are your space and facility requirements? If you want to be a ceramics artist who makes very big ceramic sculptures, you probably, and that's your primary thing, right? You probably cannot do all of your work out of a New York City studio apartment. That's just not going to happen. You need access to a kiln, you need storage space. There are just these very practical concerns to consider. So more on money, yes, not to be a downer, but we do have to think about it because we do live in a capitalist society. And we also live during the digital age, and the internet has been such a blessing and such a curse for artists. It's wonderful, the internet, because it's given artists of all kinds more options for how to make money and how to reach new audiences, how to get more exposure for their work. At the same time, there's so much competition because of things like Instagram and Facebook. You can drive yourself crazy asking, oh, which platform should I use? And how do I do all this social media and still make time for my art? And sort of on a related note, hobbies, or what used to be considered hobbies for many people, creative hobbies, are now often monetized by necessity because the cost of living in so many places is so high and wages haven't caught up. So maybe it used to be more practical to be someone like Chekhov, who was a doctor, a full-time doctor, and a physician, and he also wrote plays. And I believe he also acted in them. That's a lot harder to do these days. And even if it's possible to juggle all of that, there are plenty, like something has to give, right? Maybe you have a spouse who's taking care of the children. Maybe you have, maybe you're not a very good doctor if you're also writing these brilliant plays and staging them. It can be tough to just have a hobby that's creative and fun and doesn't need to make any money, because it costs money to do a lot of creative things, as I mentioned before. If you want to knit, you have to buy the yarn, right? You have to buy your different tools, and you have to figure out where your stuff is going to go when you're done with it. So you do have to ask yourself how money factors in your creative projects. And especially if you're doing more than one project at once, you really have to think about your budget. So do you need a business plan on top of everything else? It depends. Depends on what kind of creative project you're doing, how much money we're talking about. If you're self-funding projects, if you're getting investors, sponsors, patrons for projects, really depends. And that is a whole other topic. So if you're going to be juggling these multiple creative projects, you also have to think about your obligations. Do you have a day job? Or do you want your creative thing to be your day job? Or maybe your creative thing pays the bills, but it's also something that is your hobby, it's your passion, and it takes up all your time. Are you in school? Are you in high school, college, grad school, some kind of trade school? Do you have a family? Do you have children? Do you have elderly relatives? Do you have pets? What about your community? Are you very active, or do you want to be very active in church or whatever religious organization, or your neighborhood? Or maybe you have health concerns that take up a lot of your time and energy, going to different appointments, or you have a chronic illness, so there's only so much you can do in a day. These are all things you have to ask. What do I absolutely have to do, right, to survive, but also to have a certain amount of happiness and satisfaction in life, and to be kind and fair to the other people who are a part of your life. They say life is full of choices. So if you're going to be juggling these multiple creative projects, and this is an if, because you don't have to, and we can talk about that. What are you going to cut back on in your life? Or what are you going to cut out of your life? And do you need to discuss these choices with someone else, like a significant other, your children, your boss, your business partner, religious leader, whomever it's going to be? All right, so you've taken all of these very basic live or die kind of considerations to heart. You need to ask what your project needs. And right now I'm saying project singular for the next several slides, because we haven't gotten to the part of juggling more than one yet. It's enough to do one, and you should give yourself credit for that. So this is the dream stage of any project, right? You're just going to do word vomit. You're going to write everything down on a piece of paper, or if you prefer your screen, your iPad, your computer, your phone, maybe the Notes app. I personally love journals, but I also use the Notes app when it's not practical to have a pen and paper. Think exhaustively, really, about everything, and aim high, and double check your list and come back to the list. Maybe put it on the refrigerator or tape it to a wall and come back to it a couple of days later, a week later. And once you have dreamt up what this project is, at least vaguely, at least in this dream stage, then you have to start being pragmatic. And then you have to start doing a to-do list, just writing it out. You have to ask yourself what needs to be done. So for a complex project, it's very important to think of your project in terms of stages. I also highly suggest, especially if you're a little bit nervous or you want feedback from someone who's experienced in this field, that you run your to-do list by someone else. And again, this could be this trusted collaborator or business partner, some kind of artist that you work with directly and regularly or not. But do always consider your audience and always consider who your critic is. Hopefully this is somebody that you trust and have some kind of rapport with. So when you come up with your to-do list or lists, because maybe you have a separate to-do list for each phase of this project, something that's important to remember is that planning a project really thoroughly in lots of detail, and then marketing it, coming up with a marketing and promotion plan after the creative project is totally done. Those two parts, the pre-production and the post-production, to use film industry terms, can often take as long or even longer than making the project itself. Now, this is assuming that you're doing something not just for pure joy, totally for yourself in your bedroom, in your living room, and you don't expect anyone else to ever see it, and it's self-funded, right? But the more ambitious your project is, if you want to reach a large group of people, if you want it to make money, if you want it to make a lot of money, if you want it to lead to further projects, if you want to get the attention of potential collaborators for the future, then a lot of planning has to go into it, and a lot of promotion of some kind has to go into it after it's done. So as you're writing out your to-do list, do not underestimate the pre and the post-production of your creative project. In fact, I know for me, these are the parts I have to think about more because they're less fun. At least for me, the fun part, and many artists will agree, is actually dreaming the thing and making the thing, not so much thinking about all the strategy and all the logistics and then coming up with some kind of marketing plan and then putting the marketing plan into action. That's not so fun. But these are necessary parts of the process if you want a big audience and if you want some kind of money out of what you're doing. Schedule it. So I firmly believe in calendars and timelines. This is really something that you can do sort of at the same time as making your to-do list, depending on the complexity of the project and how much time is involved. I love to plan backwards. I hear that's what works well for a lot of people. It's good to think far out for more ambitious projects. If you need a year to do something, then pull out that calendar and look at September 2023, or whatever the case may be, and then start planning backwards. What are you going to be doing in August 2023, and July of that year, June of that year, May of that year? Some things, you know, I can do this right now. I'm ready to do this part of the project right now. but it's important to have that long-term plan. If you have a small project, one drawing, then that's something you probably don't have to think so long and hard about, 1 8x10 drawing. But if your plan, if your hope, if your dream is to do 365 drawings, let's say you have a drawing a day project, then you have to figure out, what is that actually going to look like? Are you going to be drawing every single day? Or is this more about posting on social media a different drawing every single day? Or if you have a book that you want to write or that you started to write, how many chapters is it going to have? What is your word count goal every week or every month? Or is it more about the structure of the book in some other way? Fiction versus nonfiction, it's going to be different. But again, you have to think, where do I want to be with this in 6 months? Is it going to be done in 6 months? If you think it's going to be done in 6 months, then that means you also have to ask yourself, where should the project be in 3 months from whenever the start is? So I love doing a mix of paper and digital calendars. I have the calendars set up in my phone, set up on my computer, and they talk to each other, but I still have a good old-fashioned paper calendar. I have found that when I'm planning ambitious projects, especially ambitious projects far in advance, it's very helpful for me as a visual learner and visual thinker to have the big pages of the calendar right in front of me and to be able to flip those pages. At the same time, I like to set up alerts on my phone. I like to get email alerts for certain things, but everybody's different. Some people are overwhelmed by too many notifications, and some people don't want to have a reminder of something everywhere they go. So you're going to have to ask yourself what works for you, and you might have to learn through some trial and error. But it is important to maintain your system once you have figured out what it is. Because if you let deadline after deadline slip by, you're going to have a lot of trouble completing your project or projects plural. And that's especially the case if you have more than one project going at the same time. Write it down. The plan needs to be written down. The deadlines need to be written down. And everything really has to be written out in a lot of detail. I will take a Word document. You know, my very early stages might just be writing on a napkin. That's a lot of people. Just take whatever scrap piece of paper and start writing it down, the general idea. But when it comes to the point of creating a detailed plan, I will get a Google Doc or a Word document, and I will make an outline, and I will outline each and every stage of the project. So not just write a novel, but write chapter 1, write chapter 2, write chapter 3, research for chapter 1, research for chapter 2. Further down the line could be contact an agent or hire an intern to proofread the manuscript, whatever it is. You need every single part of the project to be written down. And depending on how complex this project is, you might have a 10-page plan. You might have a 20-page plan. For me, that's what works. I know for a lot of people who work on more than one project at a time, that's what works. I've seen some people do Post-its on a wall or a board, or maintain some other kind of more visual plan that allows them to add tabs or Post-its or remove them as they complete each stage. That's fine. Again, it's going to depend on your way of thinking and planning, and it is very personal, but you do need to have a system, and you do need to think out each step as much as possible. You don't have to do it alone. You might have to do this, again, depending on the complexity of the project, with a collaborator or a team of people. Don't be afraid of asking for help or asking for feedback. And especially if you've been hired by a client to do a project, you might be provided with a team. You might have to work with a team anyway. So be prepared to do that. It can take some of the pressure off, which is wonderful. But of course, there are also difficulties that come with working with different personalities. You gotta breathe, don't get overwhelmed. Like I said before, break everything down into chunks, into stages, share the plan with the relevant parties, ask for feedback. And as this plan is being created, make sure that it's clear who is responsible for doing what. Are you responsible for all of the projects, most of the projects, some of the project? Each project will be different. Now, when you are writing out this detailed plan, don't skip steps. You can the first draft, right? The first time you're sitting down to write it, that's okay to jump ahead. But in the days or weeks that you're coming up with this plan, you do have to really go through everything. It's tempting to just jump right in. And I understand this is just in my nature. I think it's true of a lot of artists that you are just naturally a spontaneous, maybe impulsive person. And it is okay to be spontaneous, and it is okay to go on impulse. But you always have to ask yourself about everything that you're juggling right now. You have to do a status check with yourself and with the other people who are involved with these projects. Maybe it's not the right time to take on a new project. Maybe you already have too much going on. That is possible. You do have to think about your limitations. It can be really hard to see something through to the end. It can be really fun to come up with new ideas. But if you're actually going to finish something, you need to finish it. You have to go through step by step until it's done. So I highly suggest sticking to the plan. And of course, being flexible and making adjustments as needed. But don't forget the plan. Be aware of the plan. So you have to take all of these steps and you have to do them for every single project. It doesn't mean that you're doing this all at once. It doesn't mean you're doing this for 5 projects all at once. I hope not. Hopefully the projects are in different stages so that you can stagger them. At any given time, you could be tackling 3, 5, 10 different projects. But hopefully they're not all at the same stage. Because if they are all at the same stage, if you're in the production stage of all of them, that's going to be incredibly overwhelming. Quality will probably suffer unless you have a lot of people helping you. But even then, it requires energy to work with other people. It requires energy to supervise an assistant or an intern. You can have 12 interns and they could relieve a lot of your grunt work, shall we say, tasks that are less desirable for you, but you still have to show them how to do things. And that's going to take time to sit down with them and show them. So as you are considering the different projects that you have, each time you take on a new one, ask, how is this project related to the projects I already have going on? Is it related? Maybe it's not. Maybe it's totally different. Maybe this project overlaps with the other projects in a way that's useful. It's going to allow you to multitask, reduce your workload, delegate more easily, or it could just be clutter. It could not be the right time for a project. That's totally possible. Something I do is write ideas down for big projects. And then as a big project ends, I start the next big project. You don't have to start every project that comes to mind when it comes to mind. You can wait. There's value in waiting. There's value in looking at that calendar, that long-term calendar, and asking, when will I have time to do this well? Sometimes you really do have to finish a project before you can start another. You have to prioritize. Projects can overlap in terms of their timelines. It's really rare that a creative can work on just one project at a time. Maybe you've won some magical grant, or you work for some magical institution that allows that to happen. But often there's at least a 2 projects at a time sort of rhythm that happens, that as you're working on one, you're looking ahead to another. Really, I've said it before, I'll say it again, avoid scheduling projects that are at the same stage at the same time. So you don't want to have to be promoting 10 different projects all at the same time. Stagger them. And don't forget about your original plan, and always be honest with yourself about adjusting accordingly. Remember your main goals. Focus, focus, focus. It's so easy to get distracted. It's so easy to give up. Life can be really hard. But did you really give the project your all? And don't you have someone to answer to? Do you have some client to answer to? Do you have an institution to answer to? A grant giving foundation to answer to? You don't want to stray too far from what you love, because maybe it seems like all of these opportunities are coming up. You have so many choices all at once, endless choices. And it's true that sometimes life does present you with amazing opportunities that you never would have considered. And there can be wonderful surprises along the way. But it's also possible to just get lost and to stray too far from what you love. If you love painting, but you have found that all you're doing is graphic design for big corporations, you need to consider your main focus, your priorities, and how you can do more painting, and maybe cut back on some of the graphic design. Something that I don't hear about often enough is celebrating your victories, appreciating them. When a project is done, or when you've hit a milestone in a project, act like it. You've won at something, you've achieved something, you've made progress, you're closer to your goal, or you've achieved your goal. Don't just be relieved that a project is done, especially if it's a really big project that's taken up a lot of your time and energy. Sometimes you just want to say, okay, that's it. But it's important to be present in your creative endeavors. And it's also important to reflect on your creative endeavors. So when you finish a project, go have some fun, go de-stress a little bit, go relax, and that's going to refresh you for the next one, or the next step of the next project. Now, when you're reflecting, you need to ask what works in a project, what didn't work in a project. You have to be honest with yourself. If you're working with a team of people, it could be time for a focus group or a survey. And this will allow you to think about your takeaways and consider how you can do better on the next project. Or if you are already juggling another project, which you probably are, and it's at an earlier phase than the one you just finished, think about how you can finish that project, this second project or third project or fifth project or 20th project more successfully. You can only do that if you reflect. All right, so let's go back to fear, which I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation. What if you finish a project and you realize that you messed up? Or what if you just didn't finish it? What if you totally dropped the ball? Let's talk about what messing up means. There are different kinds of mess ups, and sometimes messing up is subjective. Did you miss a deadline, or did you just totally blow the project? Maybe you have a habit of starting a lot of different projects and not finishing them. Maybe you do finish your projects, but the quality is not always what you desire. Or maybe you finish your projects and you're proud of them, you're happy with them, but other people's perceptions and opinions of the project don't make you feel so good about what you've accomplished. Maybe there are critics who have written bad reviews. Maybe there are trolls online who have said that your work is horrible. You can always try again, because life is about learning, and you probably have more than one shot at a big goal. And opportunities really can present themselves in different ways. So maybe you had a solo art exhibition and the art opening only had one person come to it, and it was your mother. And you were hoping for 100 people to come that night. You can have another solo show. It's going to take time, it's going to take effort, but you can reflect on how you can get that same kind of opportunity again, and what you would do differently. Going back to what I was saying about your other priorities in life and money, right? Making a living, surviving in this society, you might ask yourself if the creative life is really what you want. Maybe your work is something that can just be a hobby. Or maybe you love consuming art and entertainment, but you realize that you don't really enjoy producing it. So some people just prefer stability and predictability. They want one path. They want a life that's colored by numbers. They don't want all this stress. That's okay. Some people don't like building something from the ground up because it does take a lot of effort. That's okay. Some people don't like surprises. That's okay. If you are being honest with yourself and you have tried all these different projects and you have never been satisfied with any of them, you just keep getting frustrated, or maybe you just never finish anything. If you've really given something an honest effort over and over again, and it just isn't working, maybe this isn't for you, but you're not going to know unless you try. But if the creative life is for you, you're just going to have this gut feeling. You're going to have these hopes and these dreams and this burning desire that's not going to go away. Motivation, like daily motivation, will come and go. So don't consider a loss of motivation a reason to stop being creative. Depression, stress, all kinds of issues can get in the way of your motivation. But consistently showing up for your dreams, and that includes your creative projects, is going to help you accomplish them. Having a little to-do list for every single day that helps you work toward those bigger goals is going to help you accomplish those bigger goals and these creative projects. So you need to persist. If you realize this is for you, you need to persist. So I'm just going to quickly go through my real world example of juggling multiple projects in summer of 2022, which is just ending, this manic period. I had my play, Mi Abuela, Queen of Nightmares. This was a stage play. It had been published as a book of poetry. It was then published as a play when I rewrote it, and it appeared in a book after winning a national competition in 2020. Wonderful year, ha ha. So it didn't have its actual stage premiere until June 2022. And it premiered at the Gene Frankel Theatre in New York City. We started casting and rehearsals in April. The rehearsals finished in mid-June. I had a team of 12 people. So a lot of people I got to bounce ideas off of, but also a lot of people I was responsible for. And in June, the second half of June, we had 10 performances. And during that time, also active promotion so that we would have a good turnout every single night. We had documentation of the show. And then after the run, had to store materials, debrief, so that everybody who was involved in the project could think about what went well, what didn't go well. The script had to be updated. We had to pitch for future shows. It was a lot. It was a very intense period. Those 2 weeks in June were the most intense. And then things still kept going after the run in July, but much less intense in July. In May, so this is when I would have been rehearsing for Mi Abuela, I had a one-night event called Poet Voice Sucks. I have a co-producer for this. It's a funny poetry series that takes place at the Broadway Comedy Club in New York City. There's usually one intern who helps out with it. So it's just every 2 months. I had it in May during the run, and then again in July after the run of Mi Abuela. And we had to do promotion, finalize the lineup of all the different funny people presenting funny poetry, had to deal with ticket sales, and then had to run the actual show for one night in May and one night in June. And then our next one is this month in September. Lunar Phoenix. So this was a book, an anthology of writing by different Black writers. There were 3 co-editors and an intern. And work on this book began almost 2 years ago. So this summer, everything really was coming to a close. The project is going to be released as a real book that people can buy online and in stores September 15th. So what did I have to do with it this summer? I had to double check the intern's layout of the book after it had already been reviewed by the other editors. I had to order a print proof of the book to make sure everything looked good when it was printed. I had to look at the intern's press release, which she then sent out, and we already started getting press coverage. And I had to ask a co-editor for the address list of all of the different writers involved in the book. So this project really was late stage, right? This is not something I could have possibly been starting at the same time as doing Mi Abuela. That would have been way too much work. Sirena's Gallery, even more advanced than Lunar Phoenix. This is a feature film that I shot in 2020. It was finalized in 2021. It had its first screening in 2021. It had its second screening earlier this year. And at this point in the summertime, I really was just working with the distributor, the commercial agent that's in charge of selling this film and answering any questions they had about marketing. They had a poster to show me, a trailer. So not a ton for me to do at this point because the marketing team with the distributor was handling it, but I still was involved. All right, so that was a lot. That was a lot for one summer. I made it happen, but as you could see, each one of those projects was at a different stage. There was no way I could have done all of them at the same time if they were all in the production stage. It would have been way too much work. So I know that a lot of the opening of the presentation, the bulk of the presentation was pretty open-ended, but that's partially because your creative projects can be whatever you want. Part of being an artist is just imagining possibilities. Ebooks didn't exist 50 years ago, and now look at how Kindle, how Amazon has revolutionized the way we read. Film didn't exist 200 years ago, and now cinema is a part of everyday life. Art really does change with culture, and artists are at the forefront of culture. So your creative life can be what you want it to be. It's up to you. If you have questions, please email me. I'm going to be sending this PDF to everyone who registered for this presentation, including the many of you who will be watching the recording later on. If you want me to look at specific projects of yours, I offer consultations, and I'm happy to do them over Zoom or in person if you are in New York City or nearby. All right, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. I'm going to stop sharing and stop recording.